Chapter 9. But when they did find Rolf, he didn't think there was anything to worry about. The Vervish are always plotting to assassinate someone, he said airily. Me today, Lulaf tomorrow, I'm sure. And Lulaf is another problem, Lila said. He said to Seely that his rooms are nicer than when he first came. Seely gaped at Lila. Only a few minutes before, her older sister had brushed aside Seely's concerns about Lulaf like they didn't even matter. But before Seely could raise a fuss, Lila gave her an apologetic look. Now that I've had a minute to think about it, it does sound strange that Lulaf's rooms would be nicer. We should look into it. But we can't very well barge into his rooms and to demand to look around. She turned to Rolf. And how do we get Kelsch and all his men out of the castle? That should certainly be our first task, Rolf said. Even if you're not afraid of them trying to kill you? Lila's face was flushed. Seely wasn't sure if her sister was joking or not. She so very much wanted Rolf to not be afraid, to assure her that everything was all right, and that none of them needed to be afraid of anything. But on the other hand, if Rolf wasn't afraid, it might be very foolish of him. The Vervish were dangerous, especially Prince Kellish, and Seely was absolutely certain that they would try to hurt Rolf before the week was out. Girls, Rolf said, putting an arm around each of them and steering them across the courtyard. I promise to tell Sergeant Avery all about this. If one of you isn't with me, then a guard will be. No, Lila said, shaking off his arm and turning to go back to the guard room. A guard should be with you all the time, even if Seely and I are there. Oh, all right, Rolf agreed. Seely had been on the verge of asking him if he was afraid, since he hadn't answered the question before, but she shut her mouth now. Rolf was afraid, she realized with a sinking heart. Otherwise, he wouldn't have turned around and followed Lila back to the guard room. They found Sergeant Avery and arranged for a pair of men to shadow Rolf. He also offered to have his men guard Seely and Lila, which Rolf immediately agreed to. But Seely and Lila exchanged looks, neither of them wanting a guard at their heels. However, how was Seely to slip around the castle as she always did, with some big man following her around? And Lila, she knew, was fond of occasionally meeting with Pogue in private. Of course, Pogue was gone now. He had left the morning after the memorial ceremony as promised. First, he was going to question the shepherds who lived around the pass and find out if they had seen or heard anything. Then he was going to the College of Wizardry to find out what he could and would return with important news. They just didn't know when that would be. I wish Pogue was here, Lila said as they left the barracks. I was just thinking that. Seely took Lila's hand. Rolf threw up his hands. What is it with him? I mean, he's very good looking, but really, both of you? And every girl in the village besides? Every girl in the village besides what? Seely asked. Lila blushed. Rolf, Pogue is trying to find out what happened to our brother and parents, she reminded him. That's all that I meant, and Seely too, I'm sure. What else would I mean? Seely gave her brother a baffled look. Oh, of course, Rolf said, snickering. He tugged Seely's hair. One day, Seal, you'll look at Pogue and think, never have I seen a finer specimen of young manhood, as every other girl who has ever seen him already thinks. Rolf, Seely said, blushing herself as she realized what he was saying. Are you talking about kissing? Yes, dear, he is, said Lila, but only because he thinks he's being funny. And really, he isn't. She raised her eyebrows at Rolf. If my jokes do not amuse you ladies, then let me apologize, Rolf said with a show of gallantry. He bowed effusively at them, walking backward. Seely saw Rolf's eyes flick over their shoulders and knew that their bodyguards were following them. Immediately, her back began to itch right between her shoulder blades, and she wanted to turn around. But she shouldn't. She just knew. They were mounting the steps to the castle's main doors now, and she could see faces peering out the windows at them. If any of those faces were Vervish, she didn't want them to think that having a bodyguard was anything new and strange. Let them wonder how long the men have been shadowing the royal family. Let them see that trained fighters were always watching, waiting to leap into action to protect the Glower children. We should go and have a few words with Prince Lulaf, said Ralph, leading them up the stairs. Just a friendly chat. I mean, if his rooms are really that fine, it would only be polite to pop in, say hello, and maybe have a little look around. He looked at Celie and Lila to see if they agreed. Mother would want us to be hospitable, Lila replied, one corner of her mouth turning up. But they were just inside the main entrance hall when they were accosted by several of their father's counselors. Standing silently against the pale stones of the main hall in their long black robes, they looked like a copse of trees on a moonlit night. Celie had to repress a little scream when the foremost of them moved forward suddenly and began to speak. It was only Lord Fiend, she reminded herself sternly. He had been the speaker of the council since before she was born. In fact, he had probably been the speaker since before her father was born. His creased face was grim, but then again, it was always grim, so there was no need to assume that his news was dire. We have something to discuss, Lord Fiend said in his quavering voice. Ah, Lord Fiend. Rolf made it as if to slap the old man on the back, then checked himself at the last moment and merely patted him gently on the shoulder. My sisters and I were about to pay a visit to one of our foreign guests, and then I shall be at your disposal. You will be at our disposal now, said the emissary. This is too urgent to wait upon a whim. He looked at Celie and Lila. The princesses are not needed, he sniffed. I'm staying, Celie and Lila said together. My sisters are needed for whatever I am needed for, Rolf said. His voice was soft, but there was a hard edge in it that made the emissary's eyes flash with irritation. Shall we then, my lords? Rolf turned and walked through the carved doors that led to the throne room. There were 3 chairs in front of the dais where the throne sat. Rolf took the one in the middle, and Celie and Lila sat on either side of him. The counselors had to stand, but it wasn't an insult. They always did. It made them feel tall, Rolf would joke. It made them feel more powerful, was Celie's thought. The council loomed above them now, and Celie wished that the castle had provided taller chairs. She straightened her spine and made sure to look Lord Fiend directly in the eyes whenever he happened to glance her way, which wasn't often, because he really only wanted to speak to Rolf. Her brother was lounging in his own chair as though bored, though Celie could see the tension in his jaw and shoulders and knew that it was all an act to make him appear older and braver. It seemed to be working, Celie thought with admiration, because Rolf didn't turn pale or flinch at what the council had to say. He listened to them and nodded sagely and made thoughtful noises without really saying anything in reply, just like their father did when he was listening to something he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Celie and Lila, on the other hand, both flinched and turned pale, and Celie had to bite her lips to keep from shouting at Lord Fiend. Lila, with her hands clenched on the arms of her chair, looked like she was trying hard not to shout as well or cry. What the council had to say was that they felt the evidence Sergeant Avery had brought was quite clear. King Glower the 79th was dead, and so was his queen and his oldest son. There had been a service dedicated to their memory. Now it was time for King Glower the 80th to take the throne, Rolf. They wanted to crown Rolf as soon as possible. This had made Celie and Lila both flinch. Celie wanted to shout at them that their parents weren't dead. The castle would have given them a sign if they were, but she had been trained not to interrupt during matters of state or to contradict her elders, so she held her tongue. Then the rest of Lord Fiend's words came clamoring out, making her go paler and paler and wanting to shout less and less and cry more and more. because Lord Feen and the rest of the council thought that the real reason Rolf was refusing the throne was because he felt incapable of ruling. The council understood, Lord Feen kept saying in a strange, gentle voice that he probably only used with wary dogs and skittish horses. The council would never leave Rolf to rule alone. Meaning what exactly? Rolf narrowed his eyes at Lord Feen. Meaning that we, your regents, will be there to guide you in every step you take until you reach such an age that you can rule alone, Lord Feen said. A regency, Lila gasped. But father never would have. What king ever imagines he will leave his heir alone this young? The emissary stepped forward. Naturally, your father didn't leave provision for a regency because he had never imagined that we would need one. But it's clear that Prince Ralph's tender age cannot support the burden of the crown. I see, Ralph said. He stood up. I thank you for your concern. The kingdom needs a strong ruler, it's true, and my parents' mishap has been sudden and shocking. I am prepared to take the throne and rule as King Glower the 80th. I have been prepared for this since I was 5 years old, and Castle Glower itself declared me my father's true heir. If it is indeed the will of the council that a king ascend to the throne now, before we have discovered my parents' final fate, then so be it. But no King Glower has ruled with a regency, and I do not intend to be the first. Rolf pinned each of the counselors with a hard look. Seely wanted to applaud. This is why Ralph had been chosen by the castle. He was always ready with a laugh or a joke, always willing to have fun. But when matters were serious, Ralph knew the right thing to say and how best to say it. Lila's cheeks were flushed, and she was looking at Ralph with admiration, too. The council, however, was not. They were frowning, shaking their heads. A few of them were smiling, but in a way that said they thought Ralph was amusing, like a much younger child or a dog that could do tricks. That is all very well, Lord Feen said, but you are outvoted. Outvoted? Ralph frowned at Lord Feen. What on earth do you mean? The council has put it to a vote and agreed unanimously that a regency is required. But I am also a member of the council, Ralph said, and I do not vote for a regency. Your disagreement on this matter is noted, Lord Feen said. However, the majority is still in favor of a regency. But if I am king, Ralph began. But you are not, the emissary said. Not yet. And until that time, as the crown prince, you are subject to the council, which has decided that we shall guide your reign until you reach a more mature age. Ralph was silent for a long time. His face was very red and then very pale. Seely could feel her own blood rushing through her body in a strange, irregular way, and knew that her cheeks mirrored Ralph's, first red, then white, then red again. Very well, Ralph murmured. If I may ask, when will I reach a more mature age, as you put it? The council has decided that 10 years of ruling with our wise guidance should fit your sole rulership, the emissary said with an oily smile. Under our tutelage, it is quite possible that you may become the greatest King Glower ever known. 10 years? Seely's throat was so dry that she could hardly whisper, and it didn't think anyone heard her. Ralph won't really be king until he's 24, her brother finished. You want me to rule with a regency until I'm 24. He plopped into his chair, holding out a hand to each of his sisters. Seely took the hand offered her, reaching across the space between their chairs. Something seemed different, and that was when she noticed that the stones beneath her chair were higher, making her just a little bit taller.